Good afternoon, everyone. Congratulations on making it to the end of day 3. I'm surprised to see as many of you as I do, in fact, especially given the topic that we're talking about. My name's Jamie Saunders, and I'm an infrastructure advisor with Anishinaabe Nation. One of the things I see a few people in this room that I've worked with in the past on different projects related to housing and water and broadband and all sorts of things. But one thing that you may not know about me is that for probably 8 years of my life, I worked as a septic system inspector and instructor of the Part 8 on-site wastewater system installer and inspectors course. I also continue to work on the side installing septic systems. So something that I have done fairly consistently throughout the last 25 years of my job, or of my life, I guess. So by all means, if you have any septic related jokes, just fire them off. Probably heard them all before. We won't start right away with those, but I'm sure you know what I mean. So we call these things on-site wastewater systems now. In the past, they were always called septic systems. Things have gone a lot more advanced in the last, I'd say even the last 10 years compared to the last 10 years before that. But we're going to sort of start off by talking about good old-fashioned septic systems. So why use an on-site wastewater system or a septic system? Typically, they're used in rural homes, subdivisions, camps outside of town or city boundaries where you don't have adequate servicing. There is over 1 million of these in Ontario, so it's not like they are not a proven technology. And still the most common type is what we call the conventional septic system. So a basic diagram of your conventional septic system. Typically, if it's the ideal scenario, the water is brought into the house using a well. The water gets used in the house, dirtied however you will, whether it's, cleaning, flushing, doing dishes, that sort of thing, and travels through a septic tank. I'm going to go into the septic tank in a lot more detail a little bit later, but we consider septic tank the pre-treatment. And then in a conventional septic system, it flows into a leaching bed. We don't see a lot of pipe and stone leaching beds anymore. Most of the leaching beds are chamber systems right now, but the leaching bed itself is a way of getting the water, after it's been treated in the septic tank, to be further treated by the soil. And the soil treats it. Think of the soil as a purifier, basically, before the water returns to the groundwater table. It's a very cyclical process, and typically all of these things could be contained on a property that's all the way down to 1/3 to 1/2 of an acre. So, you still have the opportunity to use these systems on a fairly small lot. So this is not a new technology. This is a technology goes back all the way to the 1800s. The idea of a 2-compartment tank with a partition wall in between it. You can see this is the Fosmeraz automatic scavenger, it was called. It was developed as a way of treating wastewater in France. Now, I found this really interesting because some of you may live in communities where you have septic tank effluent pump systems, where you have septic tanks that pump into a line that then potentially goes to a lagoon or a treatment system of some kind. But again, not new technology. This is all stuff that's been happening since the mid to late 1800s. The way a typical septic tank works is it is 2 compartments, and the first compartment is 2/3 of the volume, second compartment is 1/3 of the volume, and in that first compartment, you get a very well-defined scum layer and sludge layer. Typically, the partition wall is somewhere around, or there's openings in the wall somewhere around the middle of that partition, and it goes into the second compartment. There's some really, really key components in here that I'm going to talk about that really help the system function. But after the tank, we go into some kind of distribution and leaching bed system. So septic system tank capacity, this is always a tricky issue with people. Capacity for a septic tank is not defined by how many people live in the house. Tank capacity is defined by mostly how many bedrooms there are. After that, there's a calculation related to number of total fixture units in the dwelling, but also additional house area. The idea being you may have a 4-bedroom house that only has 3 people living in it, unlikely in a lot of situations, but if you have 4 full bedrooms, you have the capacity to have lots more people in those bedrooms. So the tank is always twice the daily design sanitary sewage flow and a minimum of 3,600 liters or 800 gallons. So you don't want, you will never find a situation where you're using less than an 800-gallon tank for a septic system. So main components in the tank itself are an inlet pipe, water, good bacteria, 2 compartments, separation wall with a central hole, baffles, an effluent filter, and an outlet pipe. This is the ideal travel of water through a septic tank. Certain things here I think are really important and worth highlighting. One of them being the baffles or T connections. Without those baffles or T connections in place, you can actually short circuit the tank. What happens is, I'm going to speak loudly so I can, is that if these baffles don't exist, a lot of the time this partition wall can get degraded over time. It may not be sticking that high up, but you can get just washout of the scum layer, and washout comes out that, if there's no baffle, this will just go out the inlet and basically all the way across the scum layer to the outlet of the tank. You see a lot of corrosion, particularly in concrete tanks, you can see a lot of corrosion. I know that most places are switching to PVC plastic tanks. Just, I know a lot of, at least the NAN communities I work with, getting a concrete tank into the community is probably not a feasible thing unless you're road access. So PVC is pretty much common, but I've also seen a lot of PVC tank partition walls that don't exist, that break down, that aren't attached properly and are leaning over in the tank. So believe it or not, in my career, I've probably stuck my head inside close to 3,000 of these systems, and any given problem you can imagine, you've probably seen. So, you say it might not, there's no way that could happen. I can guarantee you there's always a way that it can happen. Nope. So this is what a properly installed and sealed baffle looks like. Put that up there. You can see that all around the PVC, it's completely sealed. Typically, a lot of the new plastic tanks come with a rubber boot that you just slide it through. May be difficult to get the pipe through the boot. A little bit of dish soap always helps in that respect. And it's, in a pinch, you could just use a straight T, but you kind of always want to be using a sanitary T. You can see that sort of curve on the bottom of the inlet T. That's a typical partition wall. Could have 3 holes, could have 4 holes. It's basically the same. It could be PVC. A lot of them, I don't even know some of the newer PVC tanks, the partition wall is just that, I want to call it foam core, but it's not. It's like a corrugated core. It's not even like a plastic almost. It's like a poster board almost. So it's like really, yeah. Any way to save a buck is what I would say. And obviously this presentation is a little old, but under the Ontario Building Code now, effluent filters are required in the outlet sides of all septic tanks. Effluent filters are just exactly that. It's a filter that keeps crap from going out of the tank and into the distribution field. The more you can keep the distribution field to just receiving treated septic tank effluent, the longer your distribution field will last. Oh, that's the wrong way, sorry. So that's kind of one of the original styles of effluent filter. You could see what happens is if it gets plugged up, you just pull it out and hose it off or rinse it off in a bucket and then put it back in. And as it gets clogged, it will keep that material from going out into the field and hopefully protect your field a little bit. That's a different type of field. I'll talk a little bit about filter media disposal in a bit, but that's just one technique. So when I started in the septic system world, I was dealing with a lot of distribution pipes with wrapped in 15 centimeters of stone underneath. Typically you had a 3 or a 4 inch pipe and then a 5 centimeter of stone over top and then a geotextile fabric over top of that. Since those times, a lot has changed. This is still a very reasonable way of doing things. It's just quite labor intensive, and I know that in a lot of communities, granular and aggregate is just not a real thing. So the Ontario Building Code, and this is one of the things that I really want to stress, is that in a conventional septic system, you require 3 feet, in this case it says 0.9 meters, minimum 3 feet of separation to a stone or to a bedrock layer or to the water table. The reason for that is you need to give the water coming out of the septic tank a chance to be filtered, removed of contaminants before it gets back to the water table. Without that, you're kind of just piping wastewater into clean water, which is really to be avoided at most costs, you would think. So that 3 feet is very, very important to get the adequate treatment. If you're putting wastewater pipes, at groundwater level or just barely above groundwater level, you may still be able to get hydraulic function, like you may not see breakout, but you're not getting environmental function out of the system. And really, these systems are designed to clean the wastewater from the house and make it so it can go back into the water table. Typically, we would have 15 centimeters or 6 inches of stone underneath a distribution pipe. And it would look something like this. There's different types of distribution. This one has what we call I would call it a double header. It's just a straight pipe across with a bunch of T's off of it. In this case, it's got entrances into the header in 2 different locations. Right there and right there. So the idea being you just want to divide the flow up as much as possible going into the leaching bed. This is likely what anyone who is working with conventional septic systems will be working with these days. These are called infiltrator chambers. That's an EQ24 chamber, but you might likely only can get EQ36 chambers now. They're pieced together like Lego, and they take the place of the stone and the pipe and the geotextile. So in this case, where you can see here, you have to make these little piles of, you have to make a pile of stone, you got to run the pipe in it, and then you got to pile more stone on top. In this chamber system, you just prep the area and pop the chambers down. Goes down really quickly. They're installed level. It's pricey though. They're, you know, things, well, everything's pricey these days. Nothing's cheap anymore. Yeah, so these are the most common things we sort of see right now in conventional. There's other ways. This is called a filter media disposal bed. Instead of having rows, you can have one main gravel pad or stone pad. You could also do this with chambers. The reason you can get away with a smaller area here is that the type of sand underneath there has been specifically controlled. In this case, again, given the lack of aggregate in a lot of places, you might be able to get away with an area bed if you put some kind of treatment in between the septic tank and the area bed, but I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Location, 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 all very important. Some of the things I'd like to highlight here is we always want to keep the septic system and the septic tank at least 15 meters or 50 feet away from any well or surface water body. In case of a dug well, we're looking at 30 meters or 100 feet. The difference between a dug well and a drilled well, without going into too much detail, is that a drilled well is specially sealed down the side of the well casing, where a dug well is likely just backfilled with the local material, so you don't have the same protection from contaminants. We always want to try and keep it a minimum, the septic system that is, a minimum of 5 meters away from the house, or 5 meters, 15 feet away from the house. And 3 meters, property lines aren't as big of a deal in communities. But the other thing here is trees. Try to keep trees away from the system as much as you can. They can really wreak havoc on things, on pipes. I've seen, and I think I have a picture in here of this presentation, I've seen pipes from a tank to a field with so many roots in them you couldn't shove a pencil through them. So, you know, the things you see in this business are quite interesting sometimes. So this is the part of the presentation that I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit is causes of improperly functioning systems. You know, talk a little bit about some of the maintenance side of things. And construction and installation is extremely important. You know, as per the case in anything housing, you need to ensure that quality control goes into this work, particularly when it comes to things like making sure pipes slope the right way, making sure tanks are leveled the right way, making sure distribution headers and things like that are leveled so you get even distribution throughout everything, making sure that the soils underneath are appropriate, right? As I can't stress enough in this work how much or how important proper soils are. Having an understanding of the soil type where you're looking to install the septic system is extremely important. Obviously, granular soils like gravel and sand transport water a lot more quickly and easily than finer grain soils like silts and clays. I could spend a whole hour talking about soil type and soil, ensuring that you have the right soil conditions, but making sure you talk to somebody about some of the soil considerations in the area that you're working. There is some interesting things that, not interesting, some things that we can do. You can see that these systems have been constructed primarily in imported granular material. So they've brought in sand and they've brought in, well, basically brought in sand to put under the system. in a lot of situations, at least in the territory where I've been working for the last 5 years, bringing in material is a challenge. In the eventuality that we can't bring in material, but we have a less porous or a less hydraulically conductive soil type, you can add more length to the pipe to ensure that you provide more time for the wastewater to infiltrate back into the groundwater system. So compacted soils do not let water through as easily. If you have septic systems in areas of seasonal flooding or where water comes up in the spring, what happens if you have a saturated area is that the water, when it comes out of the tank, has nowhere to go. So you end up with backup in your septic system because the pipe has been placed in too low of an area. The bed is, or the field is saturated. So essentially you've created a hydraulic dead end for the system. You can see this picture here. This is actually a diagram of what is happening in a septic system. You can kind of see the rocks in here. That's an old septic system. And that black stuff you're seeing around that stone is the bacteria that's doing the treatment of the water for the system. So that's a very natural way for a system to get over time. The thing with septic systems is they are not built with an infinite lifespan. They are built with a lifespan of 25 to 30 years typically. It's like any other system in a lot of the communities that we work with. If you are overcrowding and overloading a system, you are going to be overloading and overworking the bacteria in that system. So if you have a system that's only designed to service 6 people and it's servicing 12 people, that's 12, twice as much food for the bacteria. The bacteria will probably grow twice as fast and you'll have twice as many bacteria plugging up the holes in the soil. So you're going to get this failure hydraulically because the bacteria clog up the holes in the soil pores. Now, the other thing with respect to that is you have to keep your bacteria healthy in the septic system. If you're using too many antimicrobials, if you're using bleach and dumping bleach down the sink, if you're doing things that, things that kill, like a lot of chemicals are really bad for living things. During COVID, we spent a lot of time sanitizing and cleaning everything to the extreme. Unfortunately, your septic system relies on bacteria to do a lot of the treatment of the waste. So we have to try and ensure that those things don't get into the septic system because it impacts the way that the system operates. So some of the common problems we see are broken piping from the septic tank. A lot of the times when a system goes in, and I mean this even in the case of communities that are on truck haul, is that when those tanks go in and those pipes go in, the backfill around them is not compacted correctly, and also access over and around those tanks is not protected adequately. If I had $1 for every tank, and this is even before I started working with Mike Fernan, if I had $1 for every tank I saw that had a truck tire go through it, or, you know, like somebody bumped it with the excavator blade, or, you know, the pipe wasn't so, like an interesting one is, it's the summer and the pipe's not supported between the house and the tank, and the sun hits it and you get a belly in the pipe because it, you know, it's a hot day, the black pipe, and you get, you know, so those initial first steps, like literally from the house into the tank, are one of the most common points of failure of the septic system. If that tank isn't level, right? You know, like, it's these little attention to detail things, like anything, that'll help your system function. The distribution box or the header is off level. You can imagine if you have a header pipe that's meant to be level, and it's got 6 runs coming off of it towards you guys, and it's all tilted to one side, only one run is going to take all of that load from that house. Pumps and pump floats are always a point of failure from what I've seen. I have no problem with pumps. I don't mind installing pumps. I don't mind working with pumps. It's just ensuring that the pumps are maintained, ensuring that your tank is working properly, so your pump chamber is working properly. And again, one of the major ways you start seeing problems with saturation is if the water can't go down in the system, the water is going to come up in the system. So that's when you start seeing ponding on the grass. So when you start seeing big black pools in yards. Striping is what we call symptomatic of that. When you drive by a lawn and you see, oh, the 4 runs of the septic system are right there. That's because that water from the septic tank isn't going down, it's going up to the surface. And ponding is the end product. So there's that picture of the roots that I was talking about. That's an old picture. Like I said, it's quite common. If you are building, so always important to assess where the groundwater table is, particularly in the spring. The changes that happen in the water table are going to be quite significant between, say, May and now. So you want to ensure that you're planning for the highest possible water table as opposed to where the water is currently. There's some examples of problems. You can see in both of these situations, your water is not getting away from the pipes. It's just building up underneath the pipes. So how would you know you have a problem? Toilets and drains backing up, odors. A real easy way to tell if you have a problem is open the outlet side of your tank and see where the water sits in that outlet baffle. If you can see sort of the entirety of the outlet pipe, it likely means that your bed is draining water to the appropriate level. If half of your outlet pipe is full, then either you have an outlet pipe that's not on the right slope getting to the distribution system, or you have water that's existing still in your septic system. So again, the damages of these systems, I come from an environmental background, so I really stress the environmental concern about sending contaminated water into potential drinking water sources. A little maintenance goes a long way in ensuring that the system is functioning properly. We talk about not so much for work up north, but even locally here in Thunder Bay, increased nutrient levels in the aquatic environment are leading to vegetation growth and algae blooms and things like that. Seeing it at Surprise Lake, seeing it in Cloud Lake. These are lakes that have had heavy usage with septic systems around the lake that have led to changes in lake chemistry. So proper maintenance, a properly functioning septic system or septic tank should only need to be pumped out every 3 to 5 years. It doesn't have to be every year. I know like a lot of truck haul systems, it's as required. Those aren't septic systems per se. Those are what I would call a holding tank. You also are supposed to pump it when the scum and sludge is greater than 1/3 of the total tank volume. And what that does is it prevents solid from exiting the tank and just adds more treatment capacity. This slide, I think, is a good spot to talk about holding tanks. I know, again, a lot of the NAN communities we've been to have a percentage or a portion of the community on truck haul where the tank gets pumped out basically as required. Under the Ontario Building Code, that is not actually legal anymore. I know it doesn't apply on reserve, but I would like to put out there for consideration that if we are using truck haul and truck haul sewage particularly, those tanks I think need to be bigger than the 800-gallon tanks that we are seeing most commonly. And I think it's important that they are alarmed properly and protected properly from damage. You see too much access to the tanks in the communities. It's just too easy for people to access them. There's a real public health risk there, and in my opinion, it needs to be flagged. Like these are situations where you have a direct access to what could potentially be a fairly detrimental thing to be in contact with, whether it's dogs or kids or just coming off your boots, when you coming back from work, there's harmful pathogens in that sewage. So proper maintenance, again, we always try to promote ongoing operation and maintenance of septic tanks, just like any other building system. I have checklists upon checklists of things that could be done and things to identify. I have a couple business cards here that I can leave with folks if you want me to put you in access or provide you with some access to resources. But just making sure that everything is inspected and looks okay. You want to make sure that someone is there when it's hard to say. Again, the capacity issues make this very difficult, but if your water or sewage truck operator is taking care of the systems throughout the community, checking to ensure that lids are sealed, checking to ensure that baffles are in place, putting effluent filters in the systems, right? Big red flag for me is if tanks are half empty yet they're being used all the time. It's not unheard of to have holes in tanks. So just being diligent about what's happening with the tank. Do not enter the tank unless you're properly trained. So again, protecting the system, avoid compacting soils, avoid damaging pipes. I keep coming back to these points because there's stuff such as, very common things like snowmobiles. Shouldn't be running snowmobiles over your septic system or over your septic tank in the line to your septic tank. And drive the frost down into those systems and keep them from, working to their maximum effectiveness. Avoid digging holes in the system, avoid putting sheds on the system, things like that, right? These are systems that are purpose designed. It's not just more yard to use as required. And controlling input, I think, is a big thing. A septic system is a very, very versatile way of treating wastewater, but it needs to be operated properly. The majority of the failures that I've seen in my careers, I can guarantee you that in 90% of them, there was some form of operator error. Whether it's, and I got stories on this one, right? Like the stuff you can see flushed down the toilet is absolutely blow your mind. And ensuring that people understand that this is a system for wastewater and gray water. It's not a garbage can. It's not a, you know, it doesn't, it's not a waste disposal. It's a water disposal, right? You can't just flush anything down the toilet and it's going to be gone. And I think that conversation is, you know, I get it. It's not an easy thing to talk about with people, right? But it ensures that people understand that whatever gets flushed down ends up, if it doesn't end up in your tank, from the tank it ends up in your sewage truck, has to go through a bunch of pumps, you know. It's just trashing your systems literally every step in the way, the extra stuff that's put into those tanks. So yeah, I think you all know what the unfriendly items are. I know during COVID that we made, I'm not sure who we made it with, might have been with the Mushkegowuk communities. We created just a one-pager that went out about things you shouldn't flush, particularly wipes. Like household wipes are particularly bad for septic systems. And anything that would, you know, anything that's going to kill something is probably not good to have in that system. Things like additives, we always get tons of questions. You know, can I add something to fix it? Starters, feeders, and cleaners. Use your discretion. Some of them work, some of them don't. You wouldn't believe the things that I've heard in this world. Like that comment, my last comment there, adding dead animals or live animals into the septic tank. It's not just a one-off. People are constantly asking me about, you know, should I throw this chicken carcass that I have in there? Will it help with the bacteria? I don't really know. I've never done the test, but to me, I'd rather not, I guess. So, what's my time here? I kind of leave this to the end. Anyone? I good? I can still go? There's a lot of new tech in septic systems, and I've worked a lot with it. It can work very well, and what it typically does is it allows you to service, using a septic system, areas that are close to sensitive waters, shallow bedrock, high groundwater tables, tight soils, really highly sloped sites. We can service those using on-site wastewater. It's not just it's not the same as just building a field and attaching a tank to it, but it can be done now. Two ways that it can be done are through what's called area beds and shallow buried trenches. These are just different ways of dispersing the effluent. A shallow buried trench is exactly what it sounds like. It's a shallow buried trench, but the whole system is pressurized. So the system time doses chambers with a pressurized spray that then infiltrates back into the ground. The idea being by controlling the dosage and the amount of volume sprayed to the chamber, you can minimize the amount of area required to distribute the effluent through. Area beds are a little bit different. You can see that green thing there, that's called a clear stream aeration unit. By providing an additional level of treatment between the tank and the distribution system, you can minimize the amount of distribution area you require. Think of it this way. If you have a septic tank and then a conventional distribution field, you have an additional amount of dirtiness in the water basically to take care of. If you add another level of treatment, you have cleaner water going to the distribution, and you can get away with a smaller distribution area. So one of these ways is aerobic. I didn't talk too much about how a septic system is an anaerobic condition. It exists without oxygen. The bacteria in a septic system are anaerobic, or they don't use oxygen. To increase the performance of, or to increase the treatment, we can put an aerobic unit after an anaerobic unit and get aerobic bacteria to do some additional chewing up of the stuff in the septic system effluent. Right. So again, this is just another picture. This is a much more complex. This has a septic tank to an aeration unit to a pump chamber that goes to a shallow buried trench. And a very small area. This is probably, just judging from that picture, I'm guessing, or the size of that system, probably servicing a house that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,500 to 3,000 square feet, probably 5 to 6 bedrooms. So we can start getting really good treatment or really good performance into pretty small areas. But once you start getting into treatment units, you know, our levels of operation and maintenance start to be much more significant. This is called an in-ground water loop biofilter. This is a different type of on-site wastewater treatment. This is called a trickling filter. This is exactly what it looks like. The water comes out of the septic tank, goes into a pump chamber, and that gets pumped over these 2 baskets. These baskets are filled with cubes that look just like mattress foam, and that cube media, essentially the water trickles through it, and it provides growing spaces for tons of bacteria to do that wastewater treatment. You can also use this system in an above ground fashion. So again, if you're in a high groundwater table or not very many soils, something like this can sit in the shed and distribute back into your groundwater. This is called an EcoFlow peat filter. It's a fiberglass shell. These come in all kinds of iterations now. A lot of these things come in a lot more configurations than they did 10 years ago. When I started in the septic business 20 years ago, 25 years ago maybe, there was like one of each of these models, you know, one type of water loop biofilter, one type of EcoFlow, one type of aeration unit. Now there's just multiple configurations for all of them to basically fit any type of site condition. So we've got a lot more tools in our toolkit now to use when it comes to on-site wastewater. This is just an example of how this whole thing here is filled with peat moss. Again, shipping makes everything a concern, but in the absence of aggregate, shipping is kind of on the table as an option. We're seeing that in all sorts of other avenues as well. There's just a picture of kind of what it looks like on a gravity feed system cut into a clay soil. It's a pretty clean install there. There are other options. Composting toilets, they're not a perfect option. I did want to talk a little bit about people's camps and places. Outhouses and composting toilets are still very much on the table as far as technologies that, you know, we can use. The one thing I wanted to mention about outhouses particularly is that separation to the groundwater table still becomes important, or that separation to the water. If you don't have that separation of the water, you're not getting the treatment. So if you have your outhouse 50 feet away from where you're pulling water out of the lake, if you're pulling water out of the lake, and there's only 6 inches of dirt between the bottom of the outhouse pit and the water table, you're creating a risk, to contaminating your drinking water, or contaminating your water for whatever use it may be. Maybe you're just doing dishes, but it's still a risk. And in my particular line of work, when it comes to water and wastewater, it's all about minimizing the risk of exposure to pathogens, right? And so composting toilets are one way to do it. I talked a little bit here about gray water systems. Gray water systems are just collecting sink water or shower water. Typically, if you're doing them under the Ontario Building Code, it should be no more than 1,000 liters a day. But they are an effective technique. You just have to make sure that you have the ability of the surrounding soil, to infiltrate, is what it is. I see a lot of situations where people just dump gray water to the surface. It's not ideal. It still presents a bit of a risk, but I understand that site conditions and material availability don't always dictate best practices. So one of the main things that I've always tried to promote when it comes to on-site wastewater is just being aware of it, is that knowing is better than assuming. Know where it is, what it is, and what it does is the basics, right? Too many people, again, I'm a wastewater guy, so I come from this world. Too many people just flush the toilet and it goes away. That's just the way it works for people. Unfortunately, if you do have some manner of tank in your system, that's not your reality. There's a risk on the site. There's a risk to cross-contamination. And be aware of changes. If you start seeing a big puddle in your front yard and it hasn't rained in a long time, could be an issue. Prevent problems, just like anything housing related. Proper maintenance, regular inspection, research, learn, and share information. The very reasons why we come to events like this. And if there is capacity, look at the systems around the community. Wrong way. So I put here some camp-specific concerns. If you have pumps, it's always good to shut down things seasonally, depending on the level of complexity in your camp. Peak loading systems that are at their margins can cause failure. And septic systems operate most effectively after a period of sustained continual use. So, as anything in this world, it's very jurisdictional. I don't know who you talk to a lot of places. If it's for on reserve, I'd say maybe your EHO would be a good place to start. The health unit, certainly in Thunder Bay District and Kenora District, is the primary contact for septic systems. Could be the Conservation Authority if you're in a more southern area, or a municipality in some cases. It's not my primary job duty, but as you probably gather, I could talk for hours about this stuff in any different fashion. So if you have questions about, anything water or wastewater related, please don't hesitate to contact myself. And I have a couple cards here and happy to pass them out. So that's really it for me. I appreciate the chance to chat. My background, I came from the Ontario Rural Wastewater Centre, and I'm a member of the Ontario On-Site Wastewater Association. Those are great resources to use, lots of materials there. And, like I said, feel free to use me and these organizations as much as you can. I I don't know if I have any time for questions, but if there are any questions, please go ahead. Oh, that's easy. Yes?
I saw, I'm not sure if I just missed it, but what about laundry, powdered laundry detergent?
Really not a big deal, powdered laundry detergent. It doesn't, you know, those things,
It doesn't mix in with the oil and grease and all that thing?
not if there's an effluent filter, that's why we talk about the filters being in place, right? It does, you know, scum and sludge are a real part of how a septic system is supposed to work, right? So they're designed to take those things if, you know, going back to the very beginning, I tried to harp on this a bunch. Where are we here? But making sure that those baffles are in place, making sure that that effluent filter is in place. Because if you have all of these things and things travel through the tank in a very proper path, then that product created by the mixture of the laundry detergent with fats, oils, and greases gets caught through the system, right? It's when you start having broken baffles. This is when you start pulling the effluent filter because it hasn't, you know, because it's not working. That's when you start to see that travel of contaminant, travel of that crap out to the distribution system, and you get that clogging, right? So, very good question, because it all comes down to operations, right? And maintenance in a lot of ways. Yes. Go ahead.
So you remove that baffle on the outward and put that filter in?
Yeah, you can even get ones that fit right in a 4-inch T. Yeah, you can just buy them. I know. Sorry?
How big is that?
That one's huge, but you can get one that just fits in a 4-inch baffle. And you buy them at, yeah. No, the filter is basically this wide, and it goes, see if I could, yeah, see if I can find a picture of it. I can show you one when we're done here. Yeah, that's a real old illustration of it. They've really streamlined them since then. I can tell you where to get them too. Miller Precast sells them. I think Emco even sells them. But feel free to come chat after.
Well, thank you, David.